Hi everybody, it's Arden XIII. So I'm coming to you with another update for my writing project that I took on for the entirety of 2021. Last month I kind of did a full 3-month, catch up on what I've been doing, so this one should be a little bit shorter than that. It's only been 1 month. But I guess a lot of progress has been made regardless, and I wanted to give you guys an update as to what that looks like and what you can expect to see on various world anvils if you intend to go look at them. April was a busy month for me and everyone here at the lunch table. Some life changes have been happening and some reassessments have been happening, but for the most part I've been trying to keep at least some modicum of writing in some way, shape, or form on my world anvils, and just here and there as we progress. I realized that last month I didn't do a whole lot of writing to completion. I had a lot of ideas and I had a lot of things that I have on like Google Docs and stuff that I wanted to put onto World Anvil, so there's been a lot of articles started with like vignettes and maybe like 1 or 2 extra things written about them if I felt really inspired to keep going with that, but not a whole lot of writing to completion. I've given a lot of stingers, and so I'm not really going to go into every single one of these 24 or so stingers, but I just wanted to let you know that if you were to go to the Elecrid World Anvil and go to the organizations, there have been a lot of organizations that have been added that will be expounded upon in upcoming weeks or months as I come up to them. One article that I was able to write to completion is an organization known as the Sleepless Knights. The Sleepless Knights are basically your werewolf and vampire hunters, everything that goes bump in the night. They are a hunting guild, kind of a la the Witchers in some way, shape, or form, but for me, they have more of that Bloodborne Vampire Hunter D aesthetic in their hats, maybe a little bit of like Warhammer Inquisitors as well. I really like the hats, more or less is what I was banking on for that one. These hunters are kind of all over the place. They're nomadic, they travel, they don't have a set home base. Generally, if there is a high commander, a knight commander of the hunter's home base will be wherever that knight commander deems to be their home base until such a time when they pass the mantle on to the next Knight Lord commander, and they move the central hub, the headquarters of the organization, to another castle or another fortress or what have you. They do take on apprentices from people that seek them out, but more or less there's no formalized training method. A lot of the training like happens on the road in like practical application rather than a whole lot of theory. The theory comes in like understanding the inner workings of some sort of an abomination or a monstrosity, or understanding that silver nitrate will rid a lycanthrope of their lycanthropy, but they are still a threat. There's that theoretical practitioner in their like education, but a lot of it is like on the road travel and physically hunting the creatures and learning from those experiences. Their ranks are not thick because of that. Another thing that I was super excited to talk about, and it was born of the new position that I started with this past month, is called the Leorastan Trade Etiquette. In the place where I work now, there is a great swell of ethnic and linguistic diversity, and one thing that I found myself taking critical note of is the fact that when my coworkers would try to communicate with people who are fluent in English, and my coworkers are not the most fluent in English. English is not their second language. There would be this tension between them and the customer, because the customer is frustrated because they can't understand, and my coworker is frustrated because they can't communicate. And that really resonated with me, and so I guess how I translated that into Elecrid is that there is this Leorastan trade etiquette. Leorasta is an autonomous island nation with a very large city, the city of Leorasta. It is a massive, massive trade port. It is also referred to as the City of 100 Kings. So many people have basically a stake or stock in that city because of how centralized it is in the trading network. It gets all of the trade from the Free Cities and the Empire of Denison and Omith, from Amistine and the Nocturna Coast, as well as the Cape of Ross and now the Crane Basin, and then from Seleohap and the rest of Kadras. If they want to get between these 3 continents, generally they have to go through Leorasta. So Leorasta has become incredibly wealthy here. I tried to kind of juggle a little bit with this language barrier that we would run into in a central location between three massive major continents, and these various different peoples who speak different tongues, have different backgrounds, and so forth. What the trade etiquette dictates is that you, as the merchant, will go above and beyond. You will meet your client more than halfway. And the way they go about doing this is that Leorastans are taught as many languages as possible, and not just a comprehension of the language, but to near fluency, if not fluency, in the language. And judging from the broad spectrum of generalized D&D languages, they are taught Elvish, Dwarvish, the common trade speech, Undercommon, Draconic, Abyssal, Infernal, or Orcish, Gnomish, Halfling. All of these, they are taught so much of the language, enough that they are able to communicate, and if they cannot communicate fluently with their client, generally they will concede to a different merchant, perhaps one that is within their own inner circle, so they can still get some sort of a benefit or a boon off of the interaction, but they will learn a language to near fluency, if not fluent, so that they can communicate with these people. How this works for a language: if you are the representative, if you are the merchant, and you have a client that walks up to you, and that client is Elvish, you have never met them before, you have never spoken to them before, on your initial meeting with them, the Leorastan merchant is trained to assume that since they are Elvish, they speak Elvish. So they will speak to them, they will greet them in Elvish, and they will carry on the conversation with them in Elvish. If that individual does not speak Elvish, or does not speak the assumed tongue that they speak, they will resort to a secondary tongue that they believe that that individual would speak, just based on what they look like, where their threads, perhaps they speak a different dialect because they're from a different part of the globe, and it could be the difference between North American Spanish and European Spanish, so they will make that assumption again, but if that doesn't work, then they will resort to the common speech. They will always want to assume that they speak the way that they look. And from there, the etiquette will obviously spiral into what they are wearing, what accessories they have, how they groom themselves, and so on and so forth. Basically, they are attempting to appear as approachable to their client as possible to get the best deal, because that is what they believe will get them the best deal. It is a manner of the softest militant capitalism. Because yes, at the end of the day, they are merchants and they are trying to get the best deal. They are trying to kind of win you over through these negotiations, and so their tactics may be a little bit cutthroat, but they don't want that to be perceived as being cutthroat. They want it to be comfortable. They want you to feel empowered by the conversation because, sure, perhaps you are an elf from Aldecairn and you come to Leorasta to strike a deal, but you're assuming that you're going to have to speak the trade tongue, which, sure, you're fluent in and you can speak that no problem, but how comfortable would you be if this person walked up to you and is just speaking to you in Elvish? That's kind of the thought process I had behind it. Another thing in Leorasta that I realized that I really only wrote a vignette for, but I'm still trying to juggle in my head how I kind of want that to be explored, is the Kithrin Institute of Magic. At the recording of this video, Strixhaven just came out, and so there's a lot of, in my head, there's a lot of that like Harry Potter magical school and all of that just kind of swimming in my head and trying to wrap my head around it, and trying to find a way to make that work in Elecrid. And not to say that there aren't multiple magical schools in Elecrid, the Kithrin Institute is just the one that I started working on because I spent a little bit more time thinking about Leorasta this month. Similarly, speaking of the Kithine, the last thing that I came up for them was this ritual that I really was just kind of offhanded. To be frankly honest, it was offhanded that I thought of this. The Gift of the Land or the Gift of the Sea, depending on location. Basically what this gift is, and this is a ritual that I have written an article for, is that prior to certain Kithine taking on a long journey, an extended journey of some way, shape, or form, whether it is over sea or over land, they will observe a meal together called the Gift of the Land or the Gift of the Sea. Basically, how that works is that by their own tooth and claw, the Kithine will acquire the ingredients needed to create some sort of a meal. And if they are going on a sea voyage, they will fish. If they are going on a land voyage, they will hunt. And they will bring back their catch, fix that into a meal, and share that with themselves and all of the people that they are traveling with. And it is just kind of a give thanks to the land, give thanks to the sea for giving them such bounty, and to award them with protection and so forth as they go about on this journey. So that was just something small and cute that I enjoyed creating, as opposed to these grandiose projects. Now, I say this is the last thing that I came up with in April, but actually it was more or less like the beginning of the month, and then all the way up to last week, effectively, is when I was thinking about this. And it's not one singular thing, it's actually like 4 or 5, but it all spurred on from this one singular concept. In Elecrid, there is an archipelago of islands, which I refer to as the Blood Isles, and it is a adaptation from a 2E AD&D campaign, one of my favorites from AD&D, called the Council of Worms, which I have kind of assimilated into Elecrid in and of itself. In the Blood Isles, there is the Council Isle, which is home to the ancient Council of Worms, a council of, no, actual just dragons, one representative from each of the breeds of dragons that basically dictate and run the world, in a sense, or at least dragon kind. It's kind of this bureaucratic arm of legislative body, or executive body, to rule over all dragons on Elecrid. With all that being said, it's not the fact that the Council of Worms that I've talked a lot about, which I really should make an article about now that I think about it. It's their servitors that I talked about. Within the archipelago of the Blood Isles, there are 2 islands in particular, that is Dagan Major and Dagan Minor. These 2 islands that are right next to each other, and they are home to the Dragon Riders of the Dagan Isles. The Dragon Riders of the Blood Isles, the Dragon Riders of Io, whomever is talking about them, they are the Dragon Riders. And sure, there are other organizations out in the world that are technically Dragon Riders, but not to the level of organization and creed that the Dagan Isle Dragon Riders are. The Dragon Riders of the Dagan Isles were founded somewhere in the midst of the Titan Wars, the wars between the dragons and the giants, which the dragons won. But, especially when the Council of Worms was first seated after the Dragon League failed entirely, the Council of Worms needed servitors. They wanted kind of a police force more or less subservient to the council itself, and not a force subservient to one of the many lords of the council, because each member of the council could muster their own armies, a la United Kingdom feudalistic system bullshit. I really need to make an article about the Council of Worms. But going back to the Dragon Riders, the process of becoming a Dragon Rider is effectively you are born on the Dagan Isles, or you wind up on the Dagan Isles, or you are brought to the Dagan Isles by a Dragon Rider, and you are matched with an egg. And when that egg hatches, you and that dragon are bound. You are trained as a Dragon Rider, all of these different things to make you a well-rounded warrior, but you have an edge because you're on the back of a dragon. Your dragon also is trained. It's a partnership between the 2 of you, more so than you and a horse. Because a horse can be a fair mount, but horses don't have claws, horses don't have wings, and horses don't have breath weapons. How I kind of expounded upon this to create basically 4 articles out of 1. I've come up with a few characters that have had some crossplay with the players. One of them is Cairo Forgotten Frost and his brother Kairam. Both of them are descendants of white dragons, but Cairo is a half-dragon, Kairam is a full dragon, and they are brothers, and they are bonded. They are rider and mount. Cairo has a great deal of clout within the Dragon Riders because, leading into our second article, very nicely transitioned, are the Zealots. And they're called the Zealots because after the cataclysm of the Council, where the Council basically broke apart because of some infighting that happened, catastrophic infighting that happened, they became very insular, not going so far out of the Blood Isles or even the Dagan Isles much at all, Cairo felt that that was not fun, not great, but so he has a small group of about a dozen people called the Zealots, and they are basically the people that follow him. They're all dragon riders that go on patrols throughout the Blood Isles, go on patrols to Amethine to the east, Draconia and the Free Cities and the Antari Wilds to the west, and just exploring where they can to try to get a better sense of the world. But where the fear of the Zealots come from is, again, a very nice transition into the next article written, which was the Order of Duquesne. The Order of Duquesne is like a fractile section of the Riders of the Dagan Isles that split off from the greater organization because of, again, another dispute. Now this dispute comes back to the Council of Worms, which is confirmed. I'm writing that article. Basically, when the Council of Worms experienced this thing called the Cataclysm, which disbanded the council, their legions were clashing all across Elecrid, no matter where you were, and it was just a massive clusterfuck of a situation. The Dragon Riders, who were supposed to be servitors to the council itself, their higher-ups decided that they would remain neutral in this conflict. They did not want to get involved because to side with one lord over another lord would be directly going against the ordinance of the Council of Worms, and they didn't want to play with that bureaucratic nonsense. They just wanted to stay out of it. But the Order of Duquesne said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to actually fight. We want to have a say in this. So the Order of Duquesne split, and they went over to Amethine. Amethine is the country literally right next door to the Dagan Isles. Didn't seek refuge, but basically took a place of power, took their own stronghold, and said, this is where we are going to operate now, which means that they got wrapped up in Amethinian politics. And Amethinian politics is based on, actually, French feudalism. So they got wrapped up in that, and they had a great deal of influence and power because they had dragons. However, since they left the Dagan Isles, within 300 years, they lost most of their dragons. So there's like a dozen or so noble families left in Amethine who have dragons, whereas the rest of the families that came over with the Order of Duquesne who no longer have their dragons are still a part of the Order of Duquesne, but now the Order of Duquesne has this very definite split in them, where there is the Dragon Lords of Duquesne, and then there are the Noble Lords of Duquesne. Duquesne is still kind of like hanging out somewhere. He's an ancient dragon who doesn't have a mount. His rider's bloodline has gone extinct, and so he just kind of hangs out in a cave somewhere, centrally located-ish in the lands that are more or less had been dished out to the Order of Duquesne, but he doesn't really involve himself with the Order too much anymore. Because they've gotten wrapped up in Amethinian politics. Oh, more articles I'm gonna have to write. But that is effectively the Order of Duquesne. They are more or less a shadow of their former selves, but as are the Dragon Riders of the Dagan Isles in and of themselves. The Zealots are kind of the only ones who are doing really well for themselves, but at the same time, they still have that fear because the Dagan Isle Dragon Riders fear that the Zealots are going to be another Order of Duquesne situation. Something I didn't mention, when they split, they took like a third of the fucking Dragon Riders with them. Like a third of the entire order split to go with Duquesne. Not the worst thing to happen, but at the same time, that is a massive blow. And they fear that Cairo, if not controlled in some way, shape, or form, his zealotous ideology will permeate throughout the order, and another situation like that will occur, which they don't want to have happen. With that being said, that's all that I have. Again, a lot of things that have been started and not finished, kind of vignettes that you can kind of look through and maybe even give me suggestions on what you want to see or read about next. I'll leave that entirely up to you guys. Here towards the end of the month, I've been, for whatever reason, diving into 40k lore, and that has also prompted more ideas in my head, which I'm sure will be reflected in May. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this recap of the April writing project. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you're intrigued. I really do enjoy this project, and there are some weeks where I do better than others, but I feel like there is some progress that is being made, and I'm very thankful for that. If I can bother you at all to hit all of the buttons below if you enjoyed this content that everyone else bugs you about, I would greatly appreciate it, and I would love to have you sit at the lunch table with us. That's all I have. I'm Arden XIII. I'm still waiting on that ramen, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.